It was the commuter railway that barely ever was. And it is likely the best rail trail that will ever be in Southern Ontario. I'm reaching back into my archives to tell you about the Toronto Beltline. Let's go. Hey, it's Trev. Welcome back to another video from the archives, where I look back on a pre-2024 Metroscapes walk that I documented only in pictures. Today's topic is a rail trail in Toronto called the Beltline, and it's arguably one of the best trails in Toronto ever. This linear corridor came about when Sir James David Edgar led a group of investors to start developing land in Moore Park, Forest Hill, and Fairbank in the late 1880s. This land was north of Toronto's urban boundary at the time, so Edgar also led investors into securing a charter for a new railway in 1890 to shuttle residents in these new homes to and from downtown. The Beltline looks like a belt, a weird one at least. West from Union Station, it followed the current-day GO Transit Barrie Line until splitting off north of Eglinton. It then paralleled Eglinton until reaching the Forest Hill area, where it turned into a southeasterly alignment to Yonge Street. It then traced the north edge of the Mount Pleasant Cemetery for a bit before cutting through it and diving down into the Don River Valley. Here, it eventually met the current-day GO Transit Richmond Hill line and continued south and west back to Union Station. But while the precursor rail lines evolved into what they are today, the Beltline Railway was hobbled by ballooning construction costs, so the Grand Trunk Railway, or GTR, stepped up and leased the line for 40 years in exchange for loans and bonds to complete construction. But after an initially successful opening in 1892, the private rail line wasn't profitable. Home development slowed, the Panic of 1893 caused ripples in Canada, and electric streetcars outperformed the steam commuter Beltline. Operations ceased on November 17, 1894. It sat abandoned for a while until the GTR, which later became the Canadian National Railway, or CN, rebuilt it for freight service between Eglinton and Mount Pleasant in 1910. They used it for another half century until it got chopped by the Allen Expressway in the 1960s. CN tried to sell pieces of the corridor east of the Allen to private landowners, as the land was very valuable and adjacent homeowners wanted to extend their backyards. This kicked off a couple years of negotiation and NIMBYism until the city reached an agreement to purchase the corridor east of the Allen in 1972. The rest of it was purchased in 1988, and it opened as a rail trail soon after. And as you will see, it has since become a gem in Midtown Toronto. I began my documentation of the Beltline in June 2019. I started in the west, halfway up the GO Barrie Line, where it crosses St. Clair. There's no trail along the corridor here, and there probably never will be, as Metrolinx is widening it to 2 tracks. They'll take out the adjacent hydro towers too. One notable spot is the Innes Avenue Bridge. These huge spiral ramps are very unique and offer a neat view up and down the corridor. The other notable spot is a tunnel between Dunraven Drive and Burt Robinson Park. At Eglinton, you're close to where the Beltline splits off from the tracks, and the rail trail begins. This is also where Caledonia Station is being built, an interchange between the Eglinton Crosstown, which is still closed at the time of writing, and Barrie GO trains. It'll be nice to use this station as a future terminus for the rail trail. The rail trail started off at Bowie Avenue, 200 meters north of Eglinton. It makes a sweeping bend eastwards around a couple factories and commercial lots. The trail crosses at grade over Caledonia Road and Roland Avenue. Caledonia has been improved since my visit by installing a traffic light. As you approach Dufferin, the trail rises up and a bridge takes you over that busy road. As you come back down and sail through Walter Saunders Memorial Park, the trail used to direct you to the streets via a condo on Beograd Gardens. The open green space continues east for another 100 meters, but adjacent apartment buildings were allowed to encroach on the railway right-of-way, even though it continued to exist legally all the way to the Allen Expressway. I railed against this missing link for years, writing the city's parks department and local councillor about it, and complaining on social media. I think there was broader noise from other trail advocates as well, and fortunately, the sands have begun to shift. At the time of my walk in 2019, the trail had been extended to Marley Avenue. From here to the Allen, the planning has started, but the city doesn't expect to finish this last link until 2026. That just leaves the remaining gap over the Allen Expressway. I was really hoping this would change when the city started evaluating the future of the Allen Expressway in 2014, but they ended up killing that study in June 2016. It looks like a multi-use trail along Elm Ridge Drive will have to suffice. It's only 100 meters of extra distance and is slated for construction in the spring of 2025. East of the Allen, the trail becomes a whole new experience. Unlike the scrubby industrial vibe to the west, this part of the trail is heavily forested and has a solid dirt base. It's like stepping into a narrow forest, except there's lots of people. The trail continues in an easterly direction until Bathurst. There was an island refuge built here in September 2018. Before then, I remember large queues of pedestrians and cyclists building up and having to dart across through traffic. At this point, the trail starts to bend to a southeasterly direction. And while it's hard to tell, this coincides with the former path of Yellow Creek. The headwaters for Yellow Creek started south of the former Downsview Airport and meandered until meeting the current route of the Beltline. This was piped long ago. The sunken route for the Beltline helps it sail below Eglinton Avenue. The trail continues southeast, once again flanked by estate backyards and large shady trees. Then two more major road crossings, though not as crazy as Bathurst. The first is Avenue Road, which is controlled by a traffic light, and Oriole Parkway, which has a refuge island as well. A little further, and the trail winds out a bit, bringing you to Yonge Street and the Davisville subway yard. This is a great spot for watching subway trains go by and cars go up and down Yonge Street. Past Yonge, the trail continues alongside Mount Pleasant Cemetery. Since it's so wide and well lit here, it's often used by the residents of the adjacent apartments and condos to walk the dog, go for a jog, catch up with the neighbors. But the rail trail pretty much ends at Mount Pleasant Road. There's a secondary tunnel, but it's gated off. I think it's quite silly. The ghost of the railway continues for a little bit before being completely obliterated. But under current conditions, you're left with two options. Take the stairs up to the road, or continue through the cemetery. And the cemetery route is only open during daylight hours. After zigzagging your way through the cemetery, the Beltline comes to another ravine, that of Mud Creek. While a chunk of this ravine was buried within the cemetery north of Moore Avenue, it lives on in a natural state to the south. It's hard to believe tracks once lived here, but this portion was abandoned pretty quickly after the railway went under in 1894, and it was not rebuilt by CN like other segments. As you descend into the Don Valley, you pass beneath some bridges. The first is a pedestrian bridge linking Heath Street. The second is an old trestle holding up tracks for Canadian Pacific Railway, now known as CPKC, and the third is the Governor's Bridge. There's also a relatively new pedestrian bridge that takes you to the north part of Don Valley Brickworks. The Brickworks actually drives a lot of foot and cycle traffic on this part of the trail. Past the Brickworks, you come to real railway tracks on what is now known as CN's Bala subdivision, or to most folks, GO Transit's Richmond Hill Line. Apparently, a scuffle broke out here when the Canadian Northern Ontario Railway tried to extend their tracks from Sudbury past this point to Toronto Union Station at the turn of the century. There was a boxcar set up as a blockade, it got blown up by dynamite, and I don't know if it got more dramatic than that. Eventually, Canadian Northern and the GTR reached an agreement, and they were allowed to use this lower portion of the Beltline to get into Union Station. Now, there's no good direct connection from here to the main Don Valley Trail, which goes along the east side of the tracks, and for some time, the Don River too. So I ended up zigzagging through Riverdale Park West to get over using another bridge. I continued down the path, which is really shoehorned in here, until I went under the tracks at Corktown Common and ended my walk at Distillery Loop. So I hope you enjoyed that little bit of Toronto railway history and a modern-day gem of Toronto's trail system. Thanks for joining me as I explore where natural and built environments collide. And remember, friends, not all those who wander are lost. Take care.